There's a lot of snow in the Soviet Union, which accounts for the jolly, Christmassy demeanour of men like Lenin and Stalin. Indeed, General Winter has long been a vital part of the Russian military staff. For that reason, at around the same time as the first aircraft were taking a few short hops, an enterprising designer in Imperial Russia called Sergei Nezdanovsky realized that he could use the same components to create a different sort of vehicle. Sometime between 1903 and 1905, he took a lightweight plywood sledge and bolted on a small motor and a propeller to push it across the snow. The potential of such a combination was immediately obvious, and the development of these aerosans, or aerosledges, went in parallel to that of early aircraft. Designers like Igor Sikorsky split their effort between the two types in their formative years. Russian military use of aerosans started in the 1910s. These were not front-line machines, but they were useful in creating lines of communications across otherwise impassable snow and occasionally also supporting ski-borne reconnaissance troops. The revolutions of 1917 changed the role and the importance of the diverse aerosan fleet. Destruction of the admittedly inefficient Russian state and its aristocratic estates led to terrible shortages of food and fuel, and long-distance transport became almost non-existent. To make matters worse, severe snowstorms in the winter of 1918-19 threatened to interrupt communications with remote areas of the country and paralysed the railways. To alleviate the situation, the newly created Central Aero and Hydrodynamic Institute, or SAGI, began work on creating a special snowmobile transport. In June 1919, the designer A.S. Kuzin made a detailed report on snowmobile technology and proposed development of aerosleds for the Red Army. And soon the Commission for the Organization of Construction of Compass Aerosleds was created under the Council of Military Industry. The only thing the Soviets loved more than a committee was a purge. The first batch of 10 aerosans was completed in the beginning of September 1919. They were used successfully in the Civil War. In particular, machines designed by Brilling and Kuzin participated in putting down the Kronstadt Mutiny in March 1921. Aerosled crews were the first to break into the besieged city, and they were awarded the Order of the Red Banner for their efforts. Based on this success, in 1921, the aircraft designer Andrei Nikolaevich Tupolev was directed to begin work on more advanced aerosans. Tupolev really wanted to work on a new generation of all-metal aircraft, but the state of the alloy production industries and the revolutionary chaos meant that the resources were not available. Instead, starting in 1921, he used the first samples of the new lightweight Kolchug alloy in the first of a family of 6 metal aerosleds, labelled Ant-1 after the designer. Ant-1 was pretty crude in some respects, and it was mainly made of wood, but it had a simple ruggedness that made it useful. Powered by a 38 horsepower, 57 degree, 8-valve, 1000cc V-twin Anzani engine, it weighed 640 pounds and it could make 25 miles an hour on snow. Buoyed by the success of this design, Tupolev continued to work on aerosans even as he also began work on his first aircraft designs. His first all-metal snowmobile was the Ant-3, a 3-seater sled with an 80 horsepower Ron engine. The body and skis were made of aluminium. The Ant-3 bis used that basic design in concert with a 50 horsepower Hacker engine. The larger Ant-4 was powered by a 100 horsepower 3-cylinder Bristol Lucifer radial. The similar Ant-5 had a 100 horsepower Fiat engine. The Ant-4 turned out to be the more successful of the two. After comprehensive testing and a number of test runs, a batch of machines built by the Sagi Experimental Design Plant were accepted for serial production. Ant-4 had 2 fixed skis at the rear and a steerable ski at the front. Suspension on the back was provided by flexing of the skis, whereas the front strut had a shock absorber at the top. You can't see it in the pictures because it's hidden by the cabin structure. Rudimentary brakes were fitted on the rear skis. The Ant-4's hull was all metal, load-bearing, semi-closed and divided into 3 sections. The body itself was made of 0.5mm corrugated aluminium. An open cabin for the driver and mechanic was up front. They sat on a 2-place bench behind a luxurious Soviet wind shield that offered some protection against the freezing air rushing past. The enclosed passenger cabin was glazed in front and on the sides. The front part contained a two-seater bench for passengers. Later, another folding seat for a third passenger was installed in the back. The cabin had decadent decorative upholstery on the inside, and an interior lamp was located on the ceiling. In the back part, there was an easily accessible removable shield, providing access to the major engine components like the magneto, oil pump, and the pipelines. Right at the back was the engine compartment, containing an oil tank above the engine and a fuel tank below it. The engine's carburetor was heated via exhaust gas in order to prevent it freezing in the extreme cold in which the aerosans were used. That engine drove a large two-bladed propeller. From 1930, a Soviet-made 5-cylinder 100-horsepower M11 engine replaced the Lucifer. Overall sophistication and the fully enclosed cabin meant that the Ant-4 could be used for more ambitious tasks. In 1930, it was used in the first regular mail and passenger aerosled line between the cities of Cheboksary and Kanash. The 85-kilometer journey took 2.5 hours instead of 10 to 12 hours on horseback. In the first 35 days, 244 passengers and more than a ton of mail were transported, covering over 5,000 kilometers in total. The Ant-4 could carry 2,000 pounds of passengers and cargo at 25 miles an hour. In 1933, a medical modification, the Ant-4S, was launched into production. This ambulance version provided indispensable support during the Winter War with Finland in 1939, as well as during the winter months of the Great Patriotic War. Although some aerosans were armed during the Winter War, I've not seen any pictures of Ant-4s carrying machine guns. They appear to have been used only for communication and transport. In general, aerosans were found to be useful for reconnaissance and light raiding in the northern areas, thanks to their high mobility in deep snow. They were, however, best used in open country as they were quite poor at climbing hills and quite bad at negotiating tight forest roads. Responsibilities for aerosans was transferred to the Soviet armoured forces, and orders were submitted for design and fabrication of lightly armoured versions, protected by 10mm of steel plate on the front. They were organised into transport or combat battalions of 45 vehicles in 3 companies, often employed in cooperation with ski infantry. Troops were usually carried or towed by transport aerosans, while fire support was provided by the heavier machine gun-armed armoured models. But even the armoured aerosans were not used for direct assault because of their vulnerabilities to mortars and grenades. That didn't mean they weren't pressed into very dangerous service, though. During the Battle of Stalingrad, aerosled battalions delivered ammunition and food to Soviet forces. Captured examples did the same for the Wehrmacht. Although military interest in aerosleds declined after the war, there remained a pressing need for civilian vehicles to service communities during the winter and for the border guards to use. So in 1961, a group of young designers at Tupolev's OKB were directed to start work on an updated design that could replace the patriotic war models. The result was the A3, built of sturdy, riveted 2mm aluminium. It was originally powered by the same M11 as the Ant-4, but on later models this was replaced by a 260 horsepower AL-14R radial, mounted on a shock-absorbing tubular frame. In this configuration, it was 13 feet long and it could carry 1,500 pounds at over 70 miles an hour on snow, or about 650 pounds at 40 miles an hour on water. In passenger configuration, it could take 5 people in the back with a single pilot up front. Cabin access was by 2 gull-wing doors, and there was a baggage storage compartment at the front. I think we would call that a frunk today. Control was via a single wheel connected to twin rudders located behind the propeller. If the wheel was pulled towards the driver, then both rudders folded outward, forming a brake. If turned and pulled towards the driver, only one rudder folded outwards, giving greater turning control over water overgrown with weeds or reeds. When traversing snow, the slightly upturned bow of the A3, together with the difference in pressure between the upper and lower surfaces of the hull, generated aerodynamic lifting forces. At speeds above 50 miles an hour, that aerodynamic lift reduced the pressure exerted by the craft against the surface by about a third. And as the depth of the furrow decreased, friction resistance reduced accordingly, and the aerosan began to skim across the surface rather than ploughing through it. On water, the large area of the lower hull, with its small keel, made it an ideal shallow draft watercraft. 800 of these machines were built, starting in 1964 and ending in 1983, making it one of Tupolev's most successful post-war designs. A couple of them came to the West after the fall of communism, where they have been restored into very cool winter transport. For the most part, though, these tough little vehicles were used to destruction in the harshest of conditions. The advent of mass-produced helicopters and readily available snowmobiles and similar vehicles made them militarily superfluous. Before leaving the topic, I should say that Tupolev was not the only maker of aerosleds in the Soviet Union. Other aircraft designers like Andreev also designed successful machines. But in pursuit of a sensible length of video, I shall leave that for another day.